Yeah, thank you, Jesse. And good evening, everybody. Glad you guys are a warm and friendly crowd by looks of it and by sounds of it. It's always almost like whiplash, right? We go from worship and praising God, and we go into all these announcements, information coming at you, and we just go straight into the message. So I would love just take a moment and take a deep breath, turn to your neighbor, and say, I'm here. All right? And he is here, by the way. I'm fully convinced that he is here with us, which is actually the title of our message tonight is Our Present Help, because he is very present. And I think as we journey, even life feels a lot like I talk about all these transitions. We're trying to keep up with all the transitions, the latest fads maybe, or just trying to be present, and we forget where he is in the midst of all of that. And so I just really want us, my heart cry tonight is that we'd be fully present here. I really feel he wants to heal our hearts, and that it's okay to let our guard down and to simply let him love us tonight. So are you here for that, or does that sound a little too vulnerable? You here for that? Here for it? Because I just look around and I'm like, globally, it's really been an intense year and a half. Anybody remember what life was like pre-COVID, like the 24 hours leading up to COVID? We had no idea what was coming, did we? And it's been an intense year and a half. And I think especially if you've been in a leadership position and you had to try and make decisions to try and, for some leaders, really bridge a gap between two massively different viewpoints. And so it began to add stress in our lives. And I think for many of us in leadership, our 2020 mindset was like, okay, let's just get through it. We'll go back to normal, right? Just get through it. And then 2021 hit, and there was a reality of like, well, this isn't going anywhere as quick as we had hoped it would. And so I think there was just this reality of intense disappointment and maybe even almost a shocking reality of how polarized society was. And even in friend groups and families and businesses or churches, people that we all thought alike, there was this realization that, wait a minute, there could be some major division here. And then I think as we went into this year, I think as Branch, many of us speak about, we went through an intense season. Any of you guys experience an intensity this summer or this fall? It's okay to be vulnerable. Just let me know who's out there, who felt that. Yeah, Merv's back there with double hands. Thank you for your honesty, Merv. Because I know that it was intense for me as well. And I think it was easy to let questions of the future come in, right? When you've walked through intensity, some of your foundations were shaken. I think there was this thing where the Lord was really working in our hearts. My perspective of this summer, even as a community, as a church, it was a purification season. He was trying to purify our hearts. But when you get to that point and you're really begin to question, our belief system can allow the enemy to come in with some lies as well. And so I think there's this element, again, maybe what it started out with is faith purification, but in the midst of that, you can find yourself at places where you don't want to be, such as experiencing anxiety, such as in a place of depression, which I know some of us have experienced this summer. And I think at times it felt like escaping it was the only solution. But I say all of this and because we are meant to be authentic community here. And I just bring this to the light to say that if you've experienced depression or anxiety or a desire to quit in the past number of months or just a general disconnect from the Lord in the past season, I just want you to know that it's okay, that you're normal, and that it's going to be okay. Okay, that's the groundwork. But I really believe as Christians, or especially non-believers, really have no idea what their foundation is in the shaking that we experienced in the last year and a half. But even in the church, I think sometimes it's like, well, I'm not supposed to be feeling this, right? Or why am I feeling this? And so the reason I bring all this up, I really feel even as believers, we can be a little bit like a vehicle that travels down the road, right? As you're traveling down the road, it picks up dirt. And you have this awareness at some point that it picked up dirt and it needs to be clean. Now, when it needs to be clean, I think that's a matter of contention among many of us, right? That's a matter of where you're at in that skill. But I think there's a reality where you all of a sudden come to an awareness of like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I don't have everything figured out. Maybe it's okay to not have it figured out, but just allow the Lord to come in and give us fresh perspective and maybe even some healing of what was. And so that's really my sense of what he wants to do tonight. By the way, I purchased a silver vehicle just so it doesn't show as much dirt. And I'm not trying to hide my dirt here, but there is this reality. Silver doesn't show the dirt. So that's just a little life hack there for you. But as I prepared for tonight, really where I felt the Lord taking us was in John 14. And I think that it's important when we read these scriptures to think about the context. And again, it's easy to read it and just blow right past it, not even think about what it was like to be in that moment. But the context of these scriptures is Jesus and the disciples, they were at the Last Supper. And he was telling them he's going to depart. He had already identified Judas as his betrayer. He had already told Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times. And he had been preparing them for several years for this departure, but they had no idea. And I think as we journey through life, again, Stevens has talked about it, we all have a purpose, and we want to be released in that right now, but we don't want to walk through the preparation season for that. But we think about the disciples, he had been preparing them for this moment, but they didn't know it. And I just want us to envision what it was like for the impending departure of Jesus for these disciples. He was their friend, he was their leader, he was everything that they had known these past few years. It was why they had walked away from everything that they had known before. And you can just sense the fear of this separation of the one that they loved and the one that they trusted. So I just want to take us into John 14 to really think about that again. And tonight is thinking about the perspective of this past season. Here's what Jesus talked to them about his impending departure. It's found again in John 14, verses 1 through 11. Simply says this: "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you, so that you will always be with me where I am. And you know the way to where I'm going." Right? So he's assuring them, you're always going to be with me. What's their response? This is Thomas. "No, we don't know, Lord," Thomas said. "We have no idea where you're going. So how can we know the way?" And then Jesus has this profound truth that he reveals to them here in this moment that we still speak about in the church today. Jesus told him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. If you had really known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him and have seen him." And Philip saying, "Lord, show us the Father and we'll be satisfied." Jesus replied, "Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? Anyone who has seen the Father is in me." No, anyone who has seen the Father has seen me, pardon me here. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking me to show him to you? Don't you believe that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I speak are not my own, but my Father who lives in me does his work through me. Just believe that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe because of the work you have seen me do. And in hindsight, or from an outside perspective, I think it's easy to be critical, and we know the whole story where the disciples were. But again, in this context, you think about what Thomas's response was. And I think we can all relate with Thomas at some point, right? Just show us how to get there. Give us the roadmap, give us a checklist, and we'll be good. Or we can maybe relate with Philip. Just give us the visible evidence. I know I've heard about you, but I've never experienced you. I've never seen the Father face to face. But I was struck by when I read this, how Jesus immediately made that connection between being troubled and the lack of trust in God. You find it again in verse 14. It simply says, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me." And he goes on to show like how they are in one. He's revealing the beauty of the Trinity, how they work together, and the Father is in Jesus and Jesus in the Father. So really my statement for tonight, to summarize this message, is our trust of God is directly related to who we believe he is. Right? Our trust of God is directly related to who we believe he is. Jesse can tell me all day long who the Father is. But if I don't believe it in my heart, I think even as we walk through this past season, for me personally, there's intellectually I knew who he was. But trust is a different thing. You can know about someone, but if you don't know their very character and nature, how do you know how they're going to respond in times of trouble? So are we really pressing in? My question really is this: are we pressing in to the Father and trusting him when the testing comes? Not just like, let's get through it, but what's he trying to do in my heart in the midst of that? And this summer, I got to be real, many times it did feel like, why not just quit? People all around us, right, are saying what we should be aspiring our lives for. And it's easy for this belief, even as believers, to come in and start to wonder if we have the solution. But again, it's pressing into the character of God. And I think it'd be almost impossible to unpack all the attributes of God, especially in a short message like this. I've heard it said this way. I've talked about this before. I think there's about 7.6 billion people in the world now. And I've heard it said this way. It takes every one of those people to reveal who God is, because he's that multifaceted. He's that vast. But it's like, what does that mean when we get up and have breakfast tomorrow morning, right? Like, if he's that vast, is he with us? And so for that, I just want to remind us that he is meant to be the center of our lives. We see that here with the disciples. They had this panic of like, he's leaving, he's been with us, where's he going? Because we were created to belong. We have this inner desire to belong. There's this connection with the Father, and there's connection with people that we're desiring. And I think it's why you see all these different cultures, all these different communities, all these different ways of connecting. We're all trying to figure out where we belong. And in and of itself, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? We want to be people that have like-minded, we have common interests, and we can relate with each other. But it's just important that that doesn't become the main thing. Even as Branch, is Jesus still the main thing? Is he still what we're centering our lives on? Is he still who we're pursuing a deeper relationship with? Because Jesus went on in John, he went on to say to the disciples, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper. So they have this fear of this departure. He's saying, look, I am going, but I'm sending the Holy Spirit. I will give you a helper to be with you forever. Even the Spirit of truth. In this day and age, that was more important than ever. Whom the world cannot receive, but it neither sees him nor knows him. But guys, there's something different when you know him. You can walk in truth because you know the Spirit of truth. Right? You know him, for he dwells with you, and he will be in you. And I'm not sharing all of this to whip us into a frenzy. I'm just saying, guys, do we know who he is? Because here's what Jesus went on to say. I will not leave you as orphans. His time on earth was done, he's telling the disciples, but I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Yet a little while, and the world will see me no more, but you will see me, because I live, you also will live. And that day, you will know that I'm in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. So again, the picture of the Trinity all being together, that's the picture he left us with, or he's trying to explain to the disciples. And I think all of you guys that know me personally, you know I like to have things in order, right? My strategic gift is a blessing, but if it's stewarded poorly, it can be detrimental to my soul. Because when an issue or a challenge arises, I begin to think about what resources do I have, or how much energy do I have to come up against this, or do I have the strength? I begin to measure my strength against the challenge that's before me. And when I do that, it always reveals my insufficiency. Because number one, I don't know how big the challenge is. I don't know how long it's going to last. What resources is it going to take? And if it reveals my insufficiency and I stay there, it always leads to anxiety. Right? Because you fear what you don't know. If you don't know how big the problem is, if you don't know what the solution's going to be, then, and I know I'm not sufficient, then the only outcome to me in that is begin to fear the outcome. But none of you guys are like that, right? You guys all have it figured out there? Anybody have it figured out? Yeah? So I think really for me is I just want to shed some light through this. Again, not just talk about it in an abstract way, but really anxiety it's the fear of the future. It's the fear of the unknown. Or maybe even for some of us, we're asking, why would an all-knowing God, an omnipresent God, a sovereign God, why would he even desire to be with us? If he's this vast that it takes 7.6 billion people to reveal his attributes, why would he care about who I am and my situation? And then depression is really having a hard time of letting go or accepting what is. We just want to go back to when it was easier, or maybe in our mind better, right? Or maybe it is asking, why would he really care about my situation? And so as I read and processed and prayed through this, I was just struck by, again, many of the Psalms, they were written during a time of trouble, right? The testing that the people that wrote the Psalms went through, they brought a revelation of who God is. And so in times of trouble, in times of anxiety, in times of depression, in times of wondering whether this is really from God, then for me, I just like to go into the Psalms and say, what was that revelation of who he is that the psalmist had? So the first one is Psalms 46, 1-3. It simply says, God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come. It doesn't say he's going to save us from them. It doesn't say they're not going to come. It says that we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. So let the oceans roar and foam, and let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. And I think we've experienced a lot of that in the last year and a half. We've experienced shaking. We've experienced trembling. We've experienced surging. But he is present. He's our refuge and he's our strength. Have you experienced some of that in the last year? Anybody? Because if it was all trembling and all shaking, then that becomes this perpetual cycle, and something has to break that. So I think it's good for an awareness of that, but I don't think it's where he wants to let us. So again, talking about who he is, I have found him to be gracious. And not all situations are easy or what we want, but he always provides grace to walk through it. That I can testify 1,000 times over. It's not always easy, but he always provides grace. But this denial of him is rejecting that grace. And so I really believe there is alignment. If we're in alignment with the purpose that he has for us, and we're in alignment with what he wants to do in our lives, he has us in attention for a reason. He's trying to teach us something, right? He's trying to shift something in our hearts. And if we're in alignment and surrender and obedience to that, there is always grace for it. But there's this denial of like, you know what? I don't really want to go there because it's going to be too messy. It's actually going to reveal too much of who I am to the people around me. Then it's like denying that grace. We step outside of his grace. And again, to me, the anxiety piece, it leads to saying, I'd rather fight on my own terms than surrender to him. Right? If we're in that place saying, I'd rather fight on my own terms, then we begin to realize that we're not enough and we're not surrendering to him. And then depression can say, I have a right to hang on to this situation, right? There was real loss sometimes. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. I can't unpack all of that for us. But I, again, know that there is grace for that. If he is asking for something, it's because he has something better to give in return. So in Psalms 18, it says, the Lord is my rock. He's my fortress and my Savior. My God is my rock in whom I find protection. He is my shield and the power that saves me and my place of safety. I called on the Lord who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. So I'm just wondering if is he really the one in whom we find our protection? Again, for me, being strategic, it's all about getting things in order, getting things in the right place. But if that can become what I put my trust in, then I've taken him away, that he's no longer my central focus. I've forgotten that he's my present help through this situation. You guys still here? I don't have it figured out, but I know that in this season, in the hour in which we're living, if we don't capture this, that he is actually very present, we're going to constantly be in a state of searching for something to find that stability, right? We're all looking for something to build our lives on. The other thing I've found him to be is merciful, right? The glory of the Lord and his righteousness is enough to destroy us. However, he chose mercy. You think about this holy and this righteous and this pure God who, when he speaks, a sword comes, or fire is out of his eyes and a sword comes out of his mouth. And you start thinking about trying to approach him in our unglorified bodies, which is why he made a way for us to actually be in his presence for all time. So there's no way that we could possibly earn that, right? But there's this mercy piece of him. He doesn't want us to compromise, right? So life is a journey of character development. But he has mercy for us in that process. That's what astounds me. Even in a season like we just walked through, with that purification, he's like, yes, I want to accomplish something in your heart, but I am making a way for that to be possible. Because I'm going to draw you into a deeper part of my heart. Because there's always more. But again, we can get caught up in this cycle of anxiety of saying, well, I'll never be good enough. Right? I'll never be good enough to be with him or even to ask for his help. And then depression says, my past defines my future. I did this a decade ago, a week ago, 3 days ago, and that defines me, right? But we're forgetting about the merciful part of God. And he will allow us to stay there if we want to stay there. Or we can press in and ask for that mercy. Here's what the Lord said to the Israelites. You think about the Israelites captured they were in 400 years of slavery. How many generations were there? Think about the mindsets that they had as well. And so he's leading them through the wilderness, and they haven't experienced mercy. They haven't experienced grace. You look at how many bricks they had to make just to be in right standing with their slave masters. And here's what the Lord does. He meets them. He comes down to Moses. Exodus 34, 5-7 says this, and the Lord came down in a cloud and stood there with him. He called out his own name, Yahweh. The Lord passed in front of Moses, calling out, Yahweh the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin. So he reveals this part of his mercy to people that have been enslaved for 400 years. You think about United States, we're in existence for what is it, about 330 years officially? 340? They were in slavery longer than the United States existed. Think about your parents and your grandparents and for 12 generations being stuck in slavery. And now beginning to receive a new paradigm of mercy. And he says, I lavish, right? When I think about lavish, I'm like, no holds barred. I am giving everything I have. Just your cup is running over. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. And yet, when it comes to us personally, we question whether there's enough mercy. He has enough mercy to lavish for 1,000 generations. So how much do we need of that? Can you receive that tonight? Can you receive that mercy that you've been contending for and believing that you can't or are not capable of receiving? Or maybe there's not enough. Maybe there's some for Stephen because he's a leader, he's a pastor, but there's not for me. There is mercy to be received. So he's gracious, he's merciful, but he's also loving. And I heard it said this way. I was stuck in a really difficult season, relational, about 10 years ago. Relationally, it was just a really, really hard season. And I did have these questions around, who is worthy of his grace? Who is able to receive his mercy? And love from the Father was this foreign idea to me. Like, it wasn't even there. It wasn't even my realm of thinking. It was like, I had this slavery mentality. If I do things just right, and I do what he's asking for today, then at least I won't get struck down, right? And that is a harsh way to live, guys. And I heard someone say this, we can't do anything to make him love us more, and we can't do anything to make him love us less. And that simple, profound truth began my personal journey of actually going to the Father when the trouble came or I messed up again. Rather than trying to run from him, that was when the journey started of actually coming to him, because I began to recognize that, wait a minute, he does love me. And a loving Father wants the children to come to him when they mess up. And I really believe this as well. Some of us need to know this, that he wants us. He wants you. He didn't make you by mistake. He didn't make you just because. He made you because he wants you. He wants to be with us. Again, he's here for 1,000 generations. He's always been. He always will be. He's our present help right now. But he wants us. Some reason he created us because he wants relationship with us. That's the truth that I can rarely get my human intellectual mind around. You can create anything you want. You're all-knowing, you're sovereign, you've always been and you always will be, and you choose to have a relationship with people. But again, anxiety says I need to earn his love, because that you can never do. And there's always this fear, and again, the fear of the outcome of saying, how am I going to do it if it's not possible to do? And then depression says I don't deserve to be loved. Again, some of us, we actually are hanging on to that belief. We've been told enough of times that we're a failure, or that our life doesn't matter, or that we don't have a purpose, either by other people, by circumstances, by our own minds. And we have actually come to believe that we don't deserve to be loved. But again, what did the psalmist say? You go into Psalms 145, it simply says, the Lord is merciful and compassionate, slow to get angry, and filled with unfailing love. The Lord is good to everyone, and he showers compassion on all his creation. Again, you hear these words about lavish and shower and all that, and it's like this picture of extravagance. He's holding nothing back. And I think about even King David. He's obviously wrote many Psalms, and I think about him and the revelation that he had of who God was when he wrote Psalms 23. I'm not going to read it now, but next time you read Psalms 23, I want you to challenge you to read Psalms 22 first. And ideally have them side by side, because when you read Psalms 22 and you see utter despair, and then you see Psalms 23 and utter peace and realization that he's got it, I don't, but he does, it just makes Psalm 23 come alive in a whole new way. So we're not stuck here, guys. If you're in a bad season or you walk through a bad season and you're just recovering, you're not stuck there. All right? He is our present help, not our future help, not our past help. He's our present help, and he wants to help us through this. Does that make sense? And I really don't want to go very long here tonight, because there's this realization that the intensity of culture and season and life, again, can catch up to us. Kelly, do you mind coming up and playing a bit? As we get ready to close, I just think about, we are three parts. We're body, soul, and we're spirit. And this message is super short, but it's for a reason. Because this message is not the solution. But he wants to draw us in, and this message is simply focusing on our spirit and what we're putting our trust in. Now, healing from anxiety or depression is often a journey. I recognize that. And this message is not meant to minimize that or say that we've done it wrong up to this point. We do have resources and connections available if you're interested in practical next steps from a body and a soul standpoint, right? There is sometimes we need to invite somebody in to help us walk through that. But from a spiritual aspect, again, I'm here to proclaim from the journey that he has put me on that our trust of God is directly related to who we believe he is. Say it again, Stephen says. Did you capture that? Our trust of God is directly related to who we believe he is. So I'm asking us tonight to take an internal temperature check with the Lord. Who do you believe he is? Is it based on truth? Is it based on lies? Is it based on who everybody told you he is? Because he is present. He is our refuge and our strength. He's gracious. He's our shield. He's the power that saves us. He's merciful. He's slow to anger, filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. And he's loving. He showers compassion on all his creation. There's enough for each of us. So as Kelly plays her in the background again, I just want to ask you, who do you believe he is? Again, this is not meant to provoke shame or say we've been failing. It's just saying that this past season, guys, I was asking every one of these things. And any time that I tried to base it upon my strength or what I could muster up, it's never enough anyway. Every time I asked him what the season's all about, sometimes it was silence, and sometimes he would just remind me, and he already told me, and it was faith purification. Talk about enough to frustrate you sometimes. I knew it was going to be worth it. I knew it. I told different people, I said, as soon as this season's over, I'm going to thank the Lord for it. But in the midst of that, it's not fun. So are you in a posture tonight where you can thank Him for it? Do you believe He is present? Do you believe He is gracious? Do you believe He is merciful? To you, not to the people around you. We can believe it for them. Shake it off, pick yourself up, it'll be fine. But when it's us, do you believe He's merciful? Do you believe He is loving? Our relationships around us can kind of hurt sometimes. It's where the tension is. And sometimes I think it gives us an incomplete picture of love. So my prayer tonight is just that we would ask Him to show Himself to us. I don't want to tell you who He is just for the sake of it. I want us to know who He says He is. I want to know who we are in Him. Again, this is not to provoke us into a frenzy. It's simply an invitation to come to the Father. So I'm going to pray. And then I just believe there's events or situations that left a mark on our soul. Right? When we think about it, it's hard. We don't know how we're going to move forward. I think we have an invitation to let the Lord in and heal Him.